Our next two speakers are quite simply changing the game for administrative professionals. Alicia Fairclough, the founder of EA How To, is passionate about connecting top-level assistants worldwide to learn, support and grow together. Alongside her is Yvette Pearson, a seasoned EA with over a decade of experience across financial services, startups and blue-chip organisations. You probably know her better as the founder and editor of the wonderful newsletter, the Adminchat. Together, they conducted 3 independent, first-of-their-kind salary surveys last year across the UK, Australia and the USA, which uncovered global pay disparities, challenged outdated assumptions and provided assistance for the very first time with the data and confidence needed to negotiate fair compensation and push for real professional equity. The results are fascinating. It was a mammoth project which they're about to repeat to ensure the data and trends continue to be mapped and recorded. So will you please join me in welcoming Alicia Fairclough and Yvette Pearson for a very special interview with Lucy Brazier, OBE. Hello, hello. So good to see you both. How are you?
Really good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, really good.
Excellent.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for doing it. I think that this piece of work is extraordinary and I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you about it because I think it's absolutely groundbreaking and something that the profession needs so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by asking you the obvious question probably, which is, last year you completed this absolutely incredible piece of work, this really comprehensive salary survey for the profession across 3 different areas, so Australia and the UK and the US. What made you think that's something we would really like to do? Because this is a piece of work.
I mean, I went to Yvette with it because I felt like I had the desire to do it, and she's always been the numbers person in this partnership whenever we've worked together, so I think Yvette can probably speak to that. But it just felt like the time we had spoken about the need for an independent survey, one that covered these locations, because there wasn't anything that really was able to compare all of these different markets and that was importantly independent. So it had no agenda behind it. It was just stating the actual data we found. But I know Yvette can speak to why she wanted to do it.
Yeah, it was definitely on the data side. I read a book around data and, as you do, data analysis, and how lots of reports and things that we see in the media and the press, where they've had like surveys and things, you have to think about who's taken part in the surveys. And lots of these salary reports are being done by various recruiters and companies around the world. And they all have very, very good intentions. Nobody goes out to try and promote anything other than just the salaries. But when you look at the recruiters or the companies that put these out, their audiences are likely to be quite specific. So if you have a recruitment firm, for example, that focuses on temps and assistants who are at the start of their career versus perhaps a recruiter who might specialize in a specific area like finance, anything like that. So their audience is already segmented. So what I really wanted to do is get a broad view, unbiased, no agenda, as Alicia said, and have it as broad an audience as possible to get the most valuable data.
Even government data is really out of date, and the data that is being used for salary benchmarking in all 3 countries is really out of date. I mean, the Bureau of Labour Statistics in the States, the last time they did the data was in 2018, so pre-COVID, and that is the data that many companies in the United States are using to decide how much they're paying their assistants and indeed what the role looks like. They're still quoting word processing and faxing in that Bureau of Labour Statistics job description and saying that it takes a few weeks to learn the role. So really, I think we could have done with an update a little while ago. And I'm so hoping that this data becomes the data that organisations go to look at and compare and see what the role is paying wherever the assistant is. So, absolutely. So listen, talk to me a little bit about what your biggest learning was since you did the survey. Were there any surprises that really shifted your perspective?
I mean, there were a few, I think, for both of us. I came out more optimistic than ever. I was a little bit nervous going in. I did a series of polls on Facebook and LinkedIn just out of curiosity, asking people in various regions what they thought the average salary was going to be. And this is, again, another lesson in your audience, because so many people were complaining about how low the average salary is and how underpaid they are. And I thought, this is going to actually be quite terrible. And the results were so much higher than we expected. I mean, across the board, almost every single location, with very few exceptions, the average assistant salary was higher than the average salary as quoted by places like the Office of National Statistics in the UK and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So I came out more optimistic than ever, but I know there were a few surprises a bit.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest surprises for me was the correlation between education and salary. And you'd normally expect there to be a clear relationship between salary levels and education levels. The more educated you are, the higher your salary. And in, I think, the UK and Australia, we saw the opposite. Average salary actually went down the more educated you were. And in the US, it did go up, but I think the difference between educated with a degree and no degree, the difference was about $6,000. So wouldn't even cover the cost of your degree. And there are loads of reasons. There's some reasons you can think of why this might happen. Perhaps people who are highly educated, perhaps they leave the profession before they earn the higher salaries or whatever. We don't know. It was interesting. It was really interesting to see and fascinating, because it's a question I get asked a lot. Is it worth doing a degree? And based on our snapshot of data, because it is just a snapshot, the answer is no, which was shocking.
Yeah, and I think the other big surprise for me was to do with unlimited annual leave, because we all, there's always a lot of discussion around unlimited annual leave and whether or not it's actually good for employees. A lot of the data suggests that when you're offered unlimited annual leave, you actually take less leave than you would if you were offered, say, your standard 20 or 25 days, something like that. And in the US, that was the case. Job satisfaction did not, it increased with annual leave until you got to unlimited annual leave, and then it actually decreased. But the opposite was true, especially with the UK. We love our unlimited annual leave, and job satisfaction just absolutely increased with the amount of annual leave you are offered, especially unlimited, and same in Australia.
So wonderful, but I think we're used to having vacation, so we know what to do with it. And really, for me, when people do have unlimited annual leave like that, what it means is that they can take time when they are feeling burnt out. And really, the annual leave is there to ensure that people are working to their full potential. It's an exercise in well-being. Somebody has calculated somewhere along the line how much time we should be taking off in order to make sure that we are functioning properly. So I never have much time for people who say, I had no time off this year at all. I've got weeks and weeks left. I'm such a martyr. I'm like, take your leave, for goodness sake.
Yeah. I feel it myself when I don't take any, then I know I'm not performing well enough. At a certain point, you start to break. You need to take your annual leave. It's good for you and it's good for the business.
Yes, definitely. I'm having 2 months off in the summer and I can't wait. I am going to go and spend a month driving around Spain, looking at all sorts of areas I haven't seen before.
Yeah, so well deserved.
Thank you. So all of that is absolutely fascinating, I think. And I really am interested because the scale of this project is extraordinary. And of course, that would have meant building trust with all sorts of different organisations to help you to share the information and with the assistants themselves. How did you go about building that trust? Because you've got a massive response. I've done surveys, and to get that number of responses is really almost impossible.
I was so relieved that we did, because I was concerned about that. But I think the key was the fact that both Yvette and I individually have built a reputation in the community for the last few years before we've ever asked anything like this. So EA How To started in 2019, and I believe the Adminchat started in 2020, Yvette? Yeah. And so it wasn't until 2024 that we even really started asking people. So we had a good 4 or 5 years of building a reputation in the community, and building that trust, which I think is really important. I mean, we're asking people, even though it's anonymous, we are asking people for quite sensitive information. We're asking for their locations and their salaries, and that's not information that people like to give freely. And it was really important to us that we were able to reassure the community that the purpose of them giving this data was with nothing but good and pure intentions, and the way it was going to be used and how they were going to be able to use the data once the reports were published. That was important to both of us.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a catch-22 really, because people want to see the report and they want to see that it's got value in it. And in order to get value, you need the survey responses. And it's almost circular. So to get as many responses as we did first time, we were so fortunate. We're so thankful to every single person that completed the survey, because it just meant that the data was that much more usable and valuable to people.
Thing with both of you is that it's very clear that both of your companies, both of your products are about the assistants as opposed to about you. You know, there are so many influences out there who are talking about themselves the whole time, and for both of you it's very much the assistant that's at the core of what you do. So it's not really very surprising to me that you had that trust for them to answer this.
Thank you.
Fabulous. So I think for me, one of the most surprising findings was how high the average salary was in the UK, £50,072 compared with a national average salary of 34,963. Did you expect that? And what do you think was driving that differentiation?
We didn't expect that at all. We were very surprised. I think there was one region in the UK, I think it was Manchester, where the average salary was slightly lower than the average for that area. That was very isolated in the context of all of the reports. I think it was a really positive thing. And I think the average salaries aren't, the high average salaries aren't all in London as they always used to be. They are spreading out around the country a little more. It's still London, which is still the main one. But I think with the increase in things like remote working, people are moving further out. They are being able to do their job from different areas. And so the highest salary isn't only London, albeit, you know, it is skewed towards London. And I think hopefully we'll see that change going forward.
Yeah, really. And I think, you know, looking at the US data, that kind of regional thing is really evident. The salaries in Sydney and Perth are so much higher than in the other cities. What do you think's happening in those markets? And what do you think that assistants from elsewhere can learn from that?
I mean, officially, we can't speak to why, because the answer is we just don't know. But what we do know from averages in other reports in other industries, and indeed our own, is that unsurprisingly, the major cities are the highest earners in all of the country. So you had your California, New York, Massachusetts in the States that were all well above everywhere else. And that wasn't unique to the assistant profession. We did compare our reports against other similar industries. We also compared against male-dominated industries like software development, other office-based ones. And the data really it tracked among what we would expect with other industries, in that cities tend to earn more. Why Perth was so high, it's interesting. I think probably a lot of mining contributed to that in Australia. But I think what was really impressive to us was that almost across the board, for every location, the assistant salaries were higher than the average for that location.
Yeah. And isn't that wonderful?
Amazing.
I mean, that's...
Yeah. I was really, really stunned, and I'm very optimistic about the profession having seen that now.
Yes, I love it. I feel like we're in such an acute state of change. And I keep saying, you know, we are at the beginning of what's happening with AI. If we look at what is going to have happened in even 2 or 3 years' time, I think we're going to be completely unrecognizable. So if people are scared right now, they really need to jump on board with it and start to learn how to use it now. But I think we are going to see it crashing through the glass ceiling finally. And hopefully assistants will be getting the kind of salaries as we're seeing here, that are above what the average salaries are.
I think it's also really important for perspective, because it can be quite disheartening if you're an assistant who isn't in London or San Francisco or Sydney, and you're not making those six-figure salaries, it can be easy to feel quite defeated and think, well, what's wrong with me? But when you compare it to everyone else in your region or in your industry, because we looked at age, level of experience, education, region, industry, you need to factor in a lot of different things. It's not as simple as I'm on 38K and somebody else is on 109K. Why? We know that assistant job descriptions vary greatly. You can be someone with the title executive assistant, but you could be working in Bristol and only have 12 months experience and be making £28,000 a year. And you can have the same title and be in San Francisco making $190,000 a year. And so, there's a big difference between the role, even though the title may be the same, which is a whole other discussion, as you know. But overall, I think perspective is really important when it comes to salaries.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So you were talking about the US. The gap between the top earners and those at the lower end was really quite striking. What do you think is fueling that disparity? And are the assistants in the lower values in the lower bands being undervalued, or is it just regional?
It was very regional. I think it's hard for us to say, as Alicia mentioned earlier, we didn't dive into people's job descriptions or things like that. So it's really difficult for us to say with any certainty why those disparities existed. However, when you looked at the regional averages versus the assistant averages, they were largely in line. They did track each other. So being able to sort of compare your salary with someone else in your region, as Alicia said, is so much more valuable than comparing it to someone in a completely different industry, a completely different area. And I think a lot of it is also, market demand and supply and demand and what money these companies have to pay for these roles.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just the average salary in San Francisco in general, it's extremely high, and everybody thinks, well, all the money is in San Francisco. The cost of living in San Francisco is also extraordinarily high. And so it's not as simple as executive assistants in San Francisco are making close to $200,000 a year. You have to factor in so much more and what the average salary and the average cost of living is in that location. But also being able to look at your level of education, your level of experience, how many years you've been in the profession, what industry. I mean, it was quite striking. Finance still comes out very much on top in terms of the top, 1% of earners are largely working in finance. And unsurprisingly, and as always such a shame, is that the lower earners are all in not-for-profit, education, healthcare.
I think people can use your salary survey then to negotiate for a higher salary, because it sounds to me like there are so many different factors in here.
There are, and I think one of the other really interesting things that we found was comparing benefits with salary satisfaction and job satisfaction, and there was actually no correlation that we could find whatsoever that aligned any kind of benefit with any kind of job satisfaction. So when companies like HR and management are offering people all kinds of fancy, and we saw some weird or uncommon benefits,
usual benefits,
that people don't place any monetary value on them. It's the salary they want.
And their salary satisfaction, their job satisfaction, I should say, increased directly in line with their salary satisfaction. So I think that was really important to note. But in terms of how assistants can use the data, I think the most important thing that they can do is have a look in the context of the location they're in, the amount of experience they have, the industry that they're in, and then go and look on places like LinkedIn, look at the jobs being advertised in those areas and see what the going rate is compared to where you are. Because if you're going to be asking for an increase, you need to speak in terms of facts and data, not emotion. And you also need to know where you're prepared to draw your line in the sand. So are you prepared to move on? If you ask for that increase and you don't get it and you know you can get more elsewhere, then are you prepared to do that? So I think looking at the data in terms of the overall context is really important, and then being able to present that data in line with what your job description is, how it's changed over the years, what value you bring to the business, and what you could be getting elsewhere in your industry, in your region.
Yes, I think that line at the bottom of job descriptions that says, and anything else I might like to throw at you, ends up being a problem, because what tends to happen then is you're going above and beyond what your actual job description is, and they see that as being part of that one line, as opposed to having a job description which is describing exactly what it is that you do, and then being clear on where you are adding skills and taking on other projects and so on that might give you a salary increase.
Yeah, definitely.
That's all really interesting. So can you tell me about pay equity? Are we seeing any progress there across race or gender, or those working part-time or flexibly, or are we still lagging there?
So we didn't ask anyone about race, but we will be asking that in the next survey to gather some information on that. This is just a snapshot, so we don't have any details on, direction of travel in terms of whether things are getting better or worse. We could compare this to other reports back in time, but obviously it will be a different data set, different audience. And so it's really difficult for us to be able to make any meaningful conclusion in that area at the moment.
I'm really excited for years 3, 4, and 5, because Yvette is constantly reiterating that 2 data points do not make a trend. And so we're about to do the second surveys and reports in 2025. And when we're at 2026 and 2027, that's when we'll actually be able to say what we're seeing in terms of trends in the data. But at the moment, because it's so new, we just don't have anything to compare it to yet.
Exciting. I'm hoping that everybody who is here or watching the recording will go and get their networks or their assistants at their offices to take part. I think that would be really helpful. Make sure we get the same kind of numbers again for 2025 and then onwards, so that we can, as you say, make sure that we've got trends in there. I know it's a huge subject, but job titles are still really contentious and a mess in this profession. We're 162 job titles currently, and that's before they start inventing new ones moving forwards. But your data still manages to tell a really consistent story. How did you standardize or group roles so that you could make sense of that title chaos?
Yeah, we found that as well, and that was a challenge. There were a lot of people whose title is descriptive of their role. So you'll have something like EA to head of marketing, or EA to VP of marketing, and they'll come up as two different titles. So we tried to consolidate all of those into a more standard EA rather than supporting anyone in particular. That helped narrow it down massively, but we did have to make some calls based on our own experience to consolidate them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so we looked at level of experience, who they were supporting, to decide whether it was really an admin assistant role or an executive assistant role. There were certain regions where we saw senior executive assistant being used quite heavily. So overall, we were able to sort of determine a category. There were some that we weren't, but we still found that the most common title was executive assistant, followed by senior executive assistant, administrative assistant. So it did follow.
Yes, for sure. I did a piece of work in a company last year where there were 60 job titles just in one company. It took us a year to track down all their administrative professionals, because the executives had been hiring them themselves and allowing them to choose their own job title pretty much. Absolutely insanity. But we got to get a handle on it if we're going to be able to measure this stuff, I think. All right. So what can the leaders of admin teams or HR partners do today with your data to make sure that salary conversations are more transparent and fair?
So I think the first thing they can do is look at how their company compares in their sector and in their area. Are they overpaying? Are they underpaying? Are they in the right ballpark? I think if you're a HR professional and you have, as a company, decided to offer people, extreme example, a pool table and some free beer on a Friday instead of giving people pay rises, our data shows that that's not valuable in any way. And we sort of know that anyway, but the data just proves that it's not valuable. I think if you're in HR and you're looking at salary conversations, the salary needs to be looked at in isolation. You need to ignore all of the benefits and things. The benefits are what entice people to come to the company, perhaps, and maybe stay if it's things like flexible hours and those kinds of things. But fundamentally, if you want people to be happy in their roles, you need to play them fairly, and you can benchmark yourself against our survey.
Something that, Lucy, you probably won't be surprised to hear is that across all of the locations where we did the report, the biggest concern that EAs had was for their future, for career progression, that they had unclear career paths and that they either saw no path forward or no clear path forward. And that was across every location that we did the survey. So I think one of the most important things that companies can do is be very clear about what it would take for you to get to a higher salary band, or to go from executive assistant to senior executive assistant, or whatever system the company has. Be clear and transparent about the skills that would be required and the work that would be required to be able to do that.
Definitely. And we hear it so often that assistants are either promoted because their executive gets promoted, so they're not promoted on their own abilities, or because of tenure, which is ridiculous because you end up with the wrong assistants looking after the wrong executives, or because their executive says, well, she's a nice girl, he's a nice boy, they do my calendar nicely, let's give them a raise, rather than it being about skills and competencies and everybody who works in administration having the same benchmarking as to how performance is. So really important, I think, if organisations are looking at that putting together of a career framework, that it is based on proper skills and the kind of tasks they can be expected to do and what the competencies are, so you can measure people clearly. And Global Skills Matrix, of course, that's what's at its heart, and we're very excited that we're in the process of doing some more research on that, because it was done in 2021, so clearly at that point there was no AI, so we want to get the stats on that. But also I think we made an error putting Chief of Staff at level 5 at the time we did it, because there were so many American companies who were promoting people to a Chief of Staff in name as opposed to in what the remit was, and we wanted to be clear what an actual Chief of Staff was. And later on in the report it does explain that it shouldn't be a natural career progression for an assistant, but I think a lot of people haven't read the report and have just look at the 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 and have therefore thought, well, a Chief of Staff is the natural progression. That doesn't mean assistants can't move to the role, but I think it's an awful lot of work to do it. So I think looking at what's happened so far, the level 5 will end up being a leadership role, so an administrative director or a head of business support, that kind of thing. And we will still put the Chief of Staff in the report as something that clearly is part of some professionals' career progression, but not as a promotion, as something which you need to do some work to do and has some of the same skill sets. I think it's going to be an interesting piece of research, that one.
I mean, the Global Skills Matrix is an incredible piece of work, and we refer to it all the time. And certainly when we're looking at what, both Yvette and I are asked quite a lot about job descriptions and titles and, for our opinion on these things. And we're always referring people to the Global Skills Matrix. It's an extraordinary piece of work that makes life a lot easier. And really pleased to hear about what you're doing with the Chief of Staff being at number 5, because completely agree with you.
Yeah, thank you. So look, how can assistants use these findings, not just for their salary, but to advocate for broader role recognition or career development support?
I think with the, and this is my personal opinion, with the correlation or lack thereof, I get with salary and education, it kind of opens up opens assistants up for what other kind of learning and development could they do. And from my personal experience, there's loads of learnings and things that you can do about your company, the tools that your company uses, and your sector that can be more valuable than a degree. And some of those courses and certifications can be significantly shorter than a degree as well, and cheaper. So I think looking at that, I think even if you have a degree or not, I think not that it doesn't matter, but I think it's not the be all and end all. There's plenty more learning and development that you can do yourself that will have more of an impact, that I think will have more of an impact.
I really hope that the people who use this report are among the lowest earners. And I certainly know what it feels like to be feeling undervalued and looking at your salary. And it's easy to look around at everybody else's salary and look on LinkedIn and think everybody else is making six figures and you're not, and why. And I mentioned earlier that perspective is really important, because you might actually be doing a lot better than you think based on your region and your industry and the level of experience that you have. But I hope that it gives them some positivity and some optimism, that they can look at this report and see that there is a way forward for them to increase their salary quite significantly, depending on if they're willing to go to a different location or a different industry or with a certain number of years of experience. They're the assistants that I think will benefit the most from this, rather than the people who are already doing really, really well. I mean, I hear a lot of talk about six-figure assistants, and the reality is, in the UK, if you're making over £100,000 a year, you are in the top 1.5%. So, which is great, but I don't want people to think that when they're, in London making 50K, that they're somehow hard done by when you look at it compared to the Office of National Statistics for other professions, so the national average, as well as the average for other assistants. I hope that it gives them a sense of perspective that makes them feel quite good about where they are.
Yes, for sure. And, there are so many people that still think of assistants as being just support, when your data very clearly shows that actually they're delivering business critical outcomes at sometimes very high salaries. So what would you say to those people?
I mean, no one's paying an assistant $190,000 a year to just support. It wouldn't make sense for anyone to be doing that. Sorry, Yvette.
No, and I think there's nothing just about our role. I think support is a big part of it, and that's okay. That's more than okay. Supporting can be business critical in so many instances, and just because you're not the person with the title making the decisions doesn't mean you're not the person behind the scenes providing the information to make the decisions. And that's just as important, if not more important.
I think a lot of this is on us as a profession as well. We need to get better at articulating our value. It's not cute anymore when asked, what do you do as an EA, to reply with, I do everything, or I'm a miracle worker. It was funny for a minute, but it's actually not anymore. We actually need to get much better at articulating our value and what it is we bring to the business. It's something that I've asked a lot, and I get a lot of, funny and facetious responses. But overall, a lot of EAs haven't perfected their elevator pitch, and they need to.
It's going to be so interesting with AI how that plays out, because right now the Bureau of Labour Statistics, certainly in the United States, only recognises level 2 on the global skills matrix, which is all the task-based reactive stuff. And really, as AI takes that stuff away, and assistants step more into being true administrative business partners. And what I mean by that is being in a situation whereby your executive is doing all the stuff that they're paid to do, and the assistant is stepping up and really contributing strategically by using their administration skills to free up the executive's time to do more of that stuff they're paid to do. But to me, assistants have always been defined by tasks that weren't really meant to define what it was that they did. It's that reactive task-based stuff which so many people associate with the role of the assistant. And yes, of course, for years we were doing that stuff. But you can see, if you look at the evolution of technology, that assistants have evolved exactly the same side by side with that. So, typewriter, word processor, then you're looking at the computer, then cloud, now AI. The assistant at every step has evolved, and not just in amount of work, but in depth and breadth of work. And I think AI is going to be the same. And I so hope that it's going to be the moment where we stop being task doers. Not that we don't do tasks, but we are so much more, particularly at the higher levels, really strategic in the roles that we do. And the pay should reflect that.
Yeah, and I think it's there are business needs for assistants who are task doers, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay. If you're sitting watching this thinking, I don't want to be a strategic business partner, I want to just come in, do a good job at my task-based job and go home, that's perfectly okay. You don't have to, do all these extra things But I think over the years, as you say, Lucy, we've absorbed all this information without realising. We don't realise how much we have moved along the journey already. I think the only thing that hasn't changed is the amount of change that we go through in our roles. And I think if we look back and see how much we have changed already, we shouldn't fear this next wave. It's just another wave.
It's just another evolution. Yeah, for sure. So listen, what's next for this research? I know you're about to embark on the 2025 version and you have a new country that you're adding. I am so excited to see that this is coming back. And when is it all happening? How can we get involved?
So stay in touch at easalarysurvey.com. We will be launching the 2025 surveys in June, so the reports will come out in September. So stay tuned for early June for the new reports, and we'll be emailing them via EA How To and the admin wrap. We'll be posting them on LinkedIn. We'll be posting them absolutely anywhere that anyone will have us. And we are adding Canada this year, which is really exciting.
And we're adding, we mentioned we're going to be adding a question on race to get some correlations between race and various other things. And we're hoping, we haven't finalised it yet, but we're hoping to add maybe one or two more areas of focus, things like remote working. We're hoping to add that in just to see whether that correlates in any way with anything.
It's a delicate balance between having enough questions to get enough data and not having so many questions that assistants don't have the time to fill it out. We're very conscious that assistants are busy people, and we're so grateful that so many, I mean, literally thousands of assistants gave their time and their data to us in this way, and we really, really appreciate it. We certainly don't take it for granted, and I hope that the 2024 report has shown how valuable this information is and encourages more people than ever to do the 2025 ones.
Fantastic. And we shall certainly share this video on our newsletter and on Adminchat, as well as on ES Global once ES Global has gone, in order to help to get some more responses for you as well. So hopefully that works. I would like to close by asking what you would love to see shift in this profession by the time you publish the next round of results. What are you hoping to achieve?
So we have no influence over people with this report. What I'm really hoping to see is an increase in just people's general overall satisfaction with their job. We want to see people happy in their roles, and happiness in a role will look different for every person. It could be salary, it could be benefits, it could be remote working, number of hours, etc., etc. We saw really interesting average salary and job satisfaction. So the salary and job satisfaction averages in the UK and the US were identical, and they were very similar in Australia, and they weren't particularly bad. It was about 6.5 for salary satisfaction, between 6.5 and 7, and then around 7.5 for job satisfaction out of 10. And so any increase in that would be great, because it just means overall we are happier.
Certainly the most proud moment that both Yvette and I had throughout this entire experience was the first time an assistant messaged us to say that she had used our data to advocate for a salary increase and got it as a result of that. And we both teared up. We went, oh my goodness, this is exactly what we had hoped. And so, and since then we've had, countless stories of EAs telling us that they've used the salary and have in fact been given a promotion or an increase as a result. So I would just love to see more of that.
Goodness me, what an amazing piece of work. Thank you so much for taking it on, because it really is an enormous amount of work. I just so much respect, and I hope that you go on from strength to strength, and I can't wait personally to see what happens when you get to the point where you can really see the trends. I think it's going to be so interesting to follow.
I'm going to take a month off and just dive into it all, because it's going to be so exciting and so interesting.
And we really appreciate your support with this so much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
No, Absolutely delighted. And listen, everybody, when the salary survey comes out, please fill it in, please share it. We want as many results as possible so that we can make sure that we're getting as excellent data as they got last year. Thank you both so much for your time. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. We will put contact details in the chat so that you can get in touch with Yvette or Alicia, and at the Admin Wrap or at EA How To. Go and see the other things that they're doing as well. But for now, thank you both for your time and thank you for a really interesting conversation.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Thanks, Lucy.
Pleasure.